each year we try to get a patient perspective on this world, and our patient perspective speaker this year has an incredible story, and it's not just a story about herself, it's about her entire family, and how you integrate lifestyle into family. And being a dad of a 1-year-old, it's very poignant for me. I was a new dad last year, and over this past year it's been an incredible experience, kind of, having starting to raise my own family, and you come to realise just how important family is. So please welcome Claire McDonnell.
So, hello, thank you. Thank you so much for having me here to talk. Thank you, Sam. I'm really humbled by being able to share our story with you all, and what a lovely, lovely conference has been, so warm and friendly. So I'll introduce our family. This is us on holiday last year. This is my husband, Justin. He's here today. Hey. My son, Rudy's about to turn 8, and that's my daughter, Leafy, in an action shot. She's age 6. This is us in Florida doing the whole Disney World thing last autumn, and we had a really, really wonderful experience. Roller coasters, meeting Minnie Mouse, the whole works. And it's really very much a holiday I do feel we wouldn't have been able to go on at all, or experience the level of enjoyment we did, if we hadn't have learned about real foods and changing our diets. So I'll explain a little bit. That's Rudy, and he won't thank me for putting that photo up. It's not a good one. But Rudy was always healthy, robust, strong, bounced back from any little cough or cold. He was really good. But he did have skin problems. So he had cradle cap, which lots of babies do. But his stayed, and eventually it kind of grew down his forehead to his nose. When we started him on solids, he around 6 months, he started developing little red patches after eating where he'd come into contact with food. It didn't seem to us to be a specific food that we could pin down, but he was reacting. And then he started getting little bubbles on his chest and on his tummy. I call them welts. So we went to the doctors and we got that checked out. They all disappeared within 10-20 minutes. There was no other symptoms, so he wasn't having loads of problems with it, but there was something going on. He was diagnosed with urticaria for those little bubbles. And then he was diagnosed with eczema because his skin started becoming dry and patchy and started having eczema symptoms. And then he also, poor thing, started having hair falling out in clumps. So he was diagnosed with alopecia areata, where sections of your hair fall out and leaving a bold patch behind, shiny scalp. So the impact on him was itchy, raw skin mainly. That was his main concern. It was making him cry, it was making him itch all of the time, and the same raw patches of skin. And this is probably familiar to lots of people. Eczema is not so uncommon, but I hadn't thought about it myself in any detail when anyone had said they had eczema, how difficult it can make family life, and how difficult it can be to experience it. So at night times I'd be putting plasters on his fingers, putting bandages on the really raw patches to try to kind of get him some protection, buying him silk mittens to put on at bedtime, and he was waking up every night and struggling to go to sleep, and we were doing what we could. I was very concerned about the alopecia, not come across it before myself, not for a child anyway, and we were healthy, we were having a good diet. I didn't know where this was coming from. We went to the doctors, and we went to regular appointments, went to the hospitals, and each of these things were looked at separately. And we were given the creams and the emollients. We tried all of those, and eventually we ended up using the steroid creams, and they cleared up the eczema beautifully, usually, but it always came back much, much worse. So I dreaded using those. And I was aware that we were treating the symptoms, so I was asking the doctors, we changed hospitals for a second opinion, I was asking the doctors to look at this as a cluster of symptoms and look at the root cause, what's going on underneath, not just topically. And I had a frank conversation with a doctor, and I do appreciate those, and I thought it was good. He told me that we wouldn't be investigating, they wouldn't be able to, but he would, keep helping with creams until we found a cream that offered a bit of relief, but not going to be looking into the underlying cause. So they're not the best pics. I was looking through the family album, and so you can see a little bit on his finger, urticaria he's got there, and that has come out not from food, but he just touched gently the gate in the back garden, so he was reacting to mould spores as well. He's dug into his back. I don't know if you can see, it's not the best pics, but where he's got kind of claw marks and red patches. And there, can you see, he's got a patch of hair growing back where he's got bold piece of hair, bless him. So here, this is a follow-up picture taken 3 months apart from this first one where his skin was quite poorly. So we looked into underlying causes and what could be treatments, and we found the Weston A. Price Foundation, and their information I think is amazing, and the GAPS diet, and that really inspired us to come up with our diet, and we put him on what I would now call, now I know, a low carbohydrate diet. I stopped making those sweet date treats of homemade chocolates, which tasted quite nice, that I thought was doing him a favour, because I cut out the sugar, so I stopped with those. And he was having bone broths and stews regularly, good quality meats, grass-fed butter. We changed to a more traditional diet and quite restrictive. And that was the result. He was a happy boy. He had lovely skin, and the difference started quite quickly actually. Within weeks we were noticing he was having less flare-ups, and he was itching less, so I was not having to chase him around telling him not to itch, like that was helping him anyway. But his skin recovered really nicely. So what we learned from our experience there was that food is absolutely awesome and shouldn't be underestimated, and is, unfortunately, with the NHS undervalued and not taken into consideration. Even after we kind of brought these experiences back to our doctors, they weren't able to take that kind of information or learning on board. But we've learnt the value of food, and we were absolutely delighted, and we were living a very happy family life again. And we learnt that there are social changes, and I've been hearing about that this weekend, and we live it. So we are the healthy family living on a healthier diet, and food, refined food and sugars are absolutely everywhere at every step of our family life. It's every shop we go into, every time I pick the children up from school, and every sports club we go to. Absolutely unavoidable. So we're eating differently, but we noticed very quickly our tastes adapted, and we enjoyed these new foods that were nourishing us, and we felt well on them. So this is Leafy. She was born around this time. We had 2 under 2, so we were busy and feeling pretty lucky and loving family life. I had a healthy pregnancy. That all went really, really well. And she was a lovely, happy baby, and she had none of the health problems or skin problems that Rudy had. But around 6 months old, she'd just turned 6 months, and we'd started her on solid food that week actually. I woke up one night to a strange noise in the bedroom, so I went over and checked on her, and she was making a repetitive movements with her limbs, and her eyes were fixed. She had saliva coming out of her mouth. She was a funny colour, and she couldn't respond when I picked her up or called her name. So we called an ambulance, and the ambulance came in 4 minutes. They were absolutely amazing, and they looked after her. They took her and me to local hospital, and she was assessed, she was checked, and she was given a recovery rescue medication to stop what we were told is likely to be a febrile seizure. So the seizure had lasted around 30-35 minutes. It'd been prolonged. She was looked after and assessed. And we found a minor childhood illness, something like an ear infection. I can't quite remember what it was now, but that had caused her temperature to go up. The first we knew she had any health issue at that time was that had caused her to go into a seizure, and we were told about those. It's not that uncommon. Children grow out of it, these things happen. So Off we went. She recovered brilliantly. She bounced back. She recovered from the medication. She recovered from the exhaustion of the seizures in the night in hospital. And off we went again. So startled, worried, concerned about it, but feeling pretty confident that that would be behind us. Then a few weeks later, I was putting her in the bath, and she went into another of these, what we now knew was a febrile seizure. So again, it was the same pattern. So her limbs were clenching and releasing, her eyes were fixed, she was having a bit of difficulty with her breathing, and she couldn't respond. So again, an ambulance came and took her to a hospital, and me. And we stayed there this time. We stayed there 6 days, 6 long days. And she had lots of tests and assessments and observations, and she was looked after. She had a lumbar puncture as a precaution, an IV drip as a precaution. She had a EEG attached to her scalp, so looking for epileptic activity, brain activity. So they glued the probes onto her scalp and observed her brain waves, which came back without anything. She went for an MRI scan while she was an inpatient, and that was really traumatic. I mean, it was all pretty daunting, scary, terrifying, but that, I think, topped it really, watching her go under. She came back from that, and we were discharged, and we were so relieved to get out of hospital. It's hot in there, all of the assessments, and get back to normal life. And again, we were told this, you know, to the best of the doctor's knowledge, this was febrile seizures. She had had a childhood illness. Again, it was a gastro one this time, and again, it was minor. And the first we'd known of it was this this seizure. So this happened again a few weeks later, and again, she was ambulanced in and stayed a couple of nights, observations, tests, checks, and released. And then again, and then again, and then again. So it almost became 3 weekly that we seemed to be going into hospital with her in an ambulance, blue lights. The complicating factors in her febrile seizures were, I mean, she was under 1, so she's a baby dealing with all of this, and they were not stopping. They needed recovery medication to stop them, so diazepam or midazolam, so quite strong medication. And they were lasting around 30 minutes typically, so something generally in between 25 and 35 minutes. A lot of exertion for her. It was, you know, it was a hellish time for us, which should have been a lovely, you know, time with our young family. But in between, she recovered well. She bounced back after she'd got over it, and her health was remarkably good otherwise. So, yeah, we were in the middle of all of this. And we, unfortunately, it did deteriorate because they started coming more frequently, the seizures, and there became other seizure types, and they were more often. They were too often. She was also, we noticed she was having episodes of wobbliness, ataxia, I think it's called, where I noticed that she'd lost all coordination, and it only lasted seconds. But it looked super frightening. It looked like videos I'd seen of mad cow disease where they lost all coordination and muscle function, only for a few seconds, but terrifying. She had episodes where, I've put behaviour here, but episodes where she was distressed and crying, and she couldn't be touched, and we couldn't comfort her, and she wouldn't have anything touch her, and that could go on 45 minutes or an hour, and sheer distress. Her sleep was absolutely atrocious. So she would take 4 hours every single night to go to sleep, and she would wake at the slightest sound, any little noise, and she went through a stage of waking every hour. So naps were impossible, and her night sleep was terrible, and that wasn't doing anything for her quality of life and her overall health. So our quality of life and our sleep and our young family life and looking after our son and trying to manage work and life and normal life in between, it was all spiralling really badly out of control. And we felt lonely and isolated. I mean, thank goodness for communities online, because I didn't feel with 2 young children like going to the mum groups very much in case we had a seizure, and we were generally suffering the after effects of a seizure as well. So we were becoming increasingly isolated as a family. And I was reading, my bedtime reading was things like SUDEP, so sudden unexpected death in epilepsy. I didn't know it was a thing. You could pass away unexpectedly. So that was what I was going to bed reading, and all about disorders and epilepsy syndromes and what triggers there were. So that was, I even remember looking up, I don't know why, but looking up what the criteria was to be a pilot, and she hadn't expressed an interest in being a pilot. But my head was thinking she had this golden open horizon, and I was just seeing how it was being narrowed and what was going to become of her, and what wouldn't she be able to do, and what might happen with all of this that was going on. Something was not going right at all. And she still had the diagnosis of complex febrile convulsions. So every single one of these seizures had been linked with a spike in temperature, and we were still very much hoping that she would grow out of all of this. So she had not been diagnosed with epilepsy, but we were told on each visit that the protocol for if she does have a non-febrile seizure would be then she would be classed as having epilepsy, maybe a specific epilepsy, maybe generalised, and then she would need a treatment, she'd need therapy to stop that. And we very much wanted to stop these seizures because we're reading about brain damage and all sorts of things, the impact it's having on her and us. So we found out about AEDs, anti-epileptic drugs, and our team told us the first one they were likely to prescribe in that situation. So, but on our nightly reads of hours and hours and hours of reading, we also found the ketogenic diet. And I found it by reading a blog of a family who were based in Canada, and they were treating their daughter with a diet that I hadn't heard of before, and she was drinking a pot of olive oil, and she was taking that pot of olive oil to school with her. And every time she had a drink, a snack or a meal, she would be drinking this. So we researched it, Justin and I, looked into it in detail, and we found that it has consistently good results, this diet, at treating different seizure conditions and different disorders. So it's consistent, it's evidence-based, loads of great studies on it, with different age range and different conditions, and and consistent results, good efficacy with different types of epilepsy. So, and we found out it was NHS supported as well. And there's clinics dotted around England, and then we found out there was a clinic in our own hospital, but we hadn't been told this. So we then asked our team about this diet, and we asked our friends who were doctors and dietitians, and we asked people we'd made contact with, and we got the same answer about the ketogenic diet. Avoid it because it's unsustainable. You can't get a child to eat in that kind of way. The foods are awful. They're unpalatable, awful, full of cream, absolutely dosing with fats, and it is for intractable epilepsy, for those rare seizure conditions and those people who unfortunately have not been able to be managed on drugs. So what we would be doing is we would be trying a low dose of the drug with her, and then going up higher until we had seizure management, or we would be adding multiple drugs in, weaning some, adding them, doing combinations, and that's how epilepsy is managed. But for those rare cases that does not work for, then you can be considered to go on the waiting list for under-resourced ketogenic diet therapy. So we looked at this. I might use my zapper now. So we looked at the side effects because that's what we've been told about ketoacidosis, limiting your growth potential. I found that vomiting, diarrhea, pancreatitis, drowsiness, osteopenia, an increased risk of fractures, I think that's the same. They also appear in the medication that she was likely to go on. So looking at that list, and this was the medication she was going to go on, they looked like more for a start, and there were things that would worry any parent, as with lots of medications, but memory impairment stood out. Birth defects, male infertility, it's been in the news recently for that. Hallucinations, bone marrow failure, dementia, behavioural disturbance, suicidal thoughts, blah, blah, blah. So, and risk of ataxia, that's the wobbliness, and convulsions. So, there seemed less with the ketogenic diet. There are less. And they can be avoided or alleviated as, Great Ormond Street Hospital. So by managing the diet, by manipulating it. So that was really interesting to us. As a parent, we were majorly focused on this learning disorders. We've got a 1-year-old to 2-year-old at this point looking when we were researching this, and that's like absolute fundamental time in her cognitive development and all of her development. So that's if we can avoid that and try something else, that seems makes more sense to us. As well as that, the ketogenic diet has behavioural and cognitive advantages, whereas AEDs work in the opposite way, dampening neural activity. So may have the opposite effect. So she had a checkup around her just before her 2nd birthday, and she was found to have a non-febrile seizure, so she was diagnosed with generalised epilepsy. So the diagnosis changed, she needed a therapy. So we, my husband and I, we started her straight away. We'd been getting ready, doing our research, and we started her, knowing we wouldn't get the support, we started her ourselves on the modified version of the ketogenic diet, and I've put real foods to emphasise that we use real foods, very much what we've been talking about over the conference. So I don't need to explain, I'm sure, high fat, low carbohydrate diet, and it's changing where ketogenic diets are changing the way your body's fueling from glucose, switching over to using ketones that you're getting from your fat sources. We put her on a 2-to-1 ratio, that's why it's modified, but, rather than what was being used typically at that time, a classic ketogenic diet, which would be a ratio of more like 4-to-1 or 3.5-to-1. So that was 2 portions of fat for every 1 portion of protein and carbohydrate that we were giving her for every single meal and every snack. And her limit, 10 grams of carbs per day, that was her max limit. The advantages of us going for the modified version, I mean, it was more manageable for us as parents, as a family. There was less fat, so that's where she doesn't have to drink the pots of olive oil and drown her foods in creams. And important for us, there was no liquid or portion restrictions, as there is with some classic ketogenic diets. So therefore she could have a wider food variety, and our emphasis was on real foods and getting good nutrients into her both through the carbohydrates and through the fats. And that therefore lowered the risk of side effects. So what's out? I mean, you guys know this, don't you? So we've opted for a real foods diet, but you can do ketogenic diet, as you can do lots of diets in different ways. You know, we do know people who do it in very different ways, and they get results for managing their epilepsy. But for us, it was a real foods diet, so we opted not to have any cereals or pastas or rice or breads, you know, the key refined bits and pieces. I think initially I was surprised how many carbs were in milk and fruits, although we weren't overdoing it on fruits, it was, we had to be very restrictive. This is a photo that we took on a flight last year. It was a diabetic meal we ordered for her to see if there was anything in that she could eat, and there wasn't. There it is. And this is the kind of food I think you're all maybe eating. So omelettes, loads of eggs, homemade bread. We've just got into bread. We've not really missed it, but we've got back into baking bread out of seed or nut flours, and then this is her fave in the middle. She has that every morning. She's got a little tray with lots of different seeds and nuts, and she gets her natural yogurt and she makes that up herself with and we sneak extra chia seeds into her nut butters, but don't tell her. Oh, I just put here, I thought I'd forget, emphasis on organic traditional foods and fermented and getting fibre. Really key, really interested in her overall health, not just ketosis, microbiome, gut health, overall support. And so that's not a bad packed lunch. I work in schools, I've worked in hundreds of different schools, supporting them to improve school food, and I don't see any that look like that. So she's not doing, and that's one of her absolute favourite meals, the bolognese. So we make our treats. We now make homemade chocolate differently and make ice cream. We're big into frozen yoghurt at the moment, the kids are, and we make birthday cakes, and we use the nut flours and seed flours, and we use mainly fruit to sweeten them, distributed amongst the recipe. So it doesn't definitely doesn't taste as sweet, and that's verified anytime a child comes to my house and tries one of my cakes. It's not quite what they're expecting. It looks the part, but it's not got the hit, but we love it. Our palate has definitely changed. It's got no additives, no refined, and we don't use artificial sweetness. Challenges. So I have to say it was challenging at the beginning, especially. It was a steep learning curve for us, even coming from doing a really restrictive diet with Rudy in the past, learning about carbs, and we were weighing and measuring, and we were logging, and we were tracking everything. So that was hard, and we were often cooking until 2 a.m. or early hours, trying to get these recipes right. And we were up against it time-wise when we started, because we were in Australia, where we were at that time, and we were coming back to England in days' time. So we needed foods that were good for travelling. And you can tell how new we were to the whole ketogenic diet recipe making, because we decided a good look for the flight for 26 hours of travel would be a frittata of egg, cauliflower and tuna. By the time we got to Perth airport, it was already a grey sopping mess. So yeah, that wasn't the best look, but we managed. So social occasions, it was very difficult at the beginning. I was quite anxious at birthday parties or outings. I was following her around. I was suddenly a helicopter parent in case she touched a bit of icing or somebody handed her a sweet. And eating out, we didn't eat out because we were weighing and measuring, and we were getting our confidence up with it. But I have to say that because I'm being honest, that there are challenges and it is difficult, and sugar is absolutely everywhere. And being a different family, eating differently, it can be tricky, but it's easier than managing health problems, and definitely easier than sitting in a room with her recovering from a seizure when she should be playing outside, and I can hear other children playing on a summer's day outside. So that's the absolute pits. So cooking until midnight is not too much of a problem, and that's only in the beginning until you've got your repertoire and it becomes, second nature, as it has done for us now. So my tip to other families, my absolute top tip for any diet change, maybe not keto, but any diet change, moving on to real foods or anything, is to make home that environment where they're safe. Because every time they go out, every time they go to school, every time they go to a friend's house, every time they go to shop, they're surrounded by things. So if you can avoid temptation and eat together and eat the same foods and enjoy them and speak positively about them, that's a winner. You're going to kind of get that compliance that we were told we wouldn't get. You're going to get that confidence and that enjoyment of food as well. We frame this really positively with our daughter. We call it her amazing diet, so she calls it her amazing diet. So if you've got a cough, you're poorly, you've got a sniffle, she'll come up to you and tell you that you should be doing her amazing diet. And I don't think she's too far wrong, actually. So here she is. Quite the different picture, and these are the benefits for her and therefore for us as parents. Absolutely amazing seizure reduction. So she took to these foods, apart from a certain frittata, she really nicely, and she enjoyed them, and she was absolutely fine. She'd never really been into carbs that much anyway. So, and within days she was producing ketones, and we say she's rock solid in ketosis because she always produces consistent ketones. We kept being really flexible with her diet, and she still produces them. But within say day 3, she started producing ketones. She was having 60 myoclonic clusters of seizures a day at that point. They last about 2 seconds, maybe 3-4 seconds, but she has clusters of them, and they make her hands go up in the air and her eyes roll in a quite disturbing way, and stopped her speaking. And other children were remarking on that in the playground, and that was kind of causing me, a little bit of distress. And that was really affecting her. They went on day 3 and they've never come back. So that in itself was awesome. So her main seizure type was her tonic-clonics. So weeks before we started the keto diet, she'd had a major seizure, and it had lasted 45 minutes or more. We'd been ambulanced to Perth airport. The medication we carry didn't stop it. The medication the paramedics gave her didn't stop it. And we found ourselves on a hospital ward in Perth. And it lasted 45 minutes. And she her seizures of those major ones, they started reducing in how often they were. They were twice a week approximately. They became weekly, fortnightly, monthly, and then major, like long spells apart. So she has really good seizure-free periods. And they became, from 45 minutes or averaging around 20, 30 minutes, they became 10 minutes, then 8 minutes, then 5 minutes, and now the longest would be 2. And that means she doesn't have to have that recovery medication to stop those seizures. So they became self-resolving, and all really quickly, these results started kicking in. Her sleep improved. The first thing we noticed was it was deeper. So that was really good for her overall health, and then she started settling easier, and incrementally that improved and improved. She didn't have any more of the screaming or the wobbly episodes. Everything seemed to level out for her. Developmentally, she's on track. That's absolutely super important for us. It was what one thing we wanted seizure control, and we wanted to protect her cognitively. From the potential brain damage that could be caused from a seizure, from the dampening effect of medication, and because of some of the seizure disorders I was reading about and I was concerned about are linked to development delays. And in fact, later on, she was diagnosed with that a specific genetic epilepsy that is linked to development delays, cognitive losses in between age 2 and 6, where you might lose your speech, the skills you've learned, walking. So fortunately, she has found the right therapy, on the right therapy at the right time for her, and is having all of these amazing advantages of them. She's meeting her vitamin and mineral levels and nutrient levels every time we're in clinic. We get her bloods tested. She's hitting all of those, and they often remark, and that's without NHS fruity bits. So that's all good. And like I say, she's extremely proud of her diet, and she talks openly, positively, and confidently, which is really, really important for her. And no ambulance trips, no hospital stays, no stays on ward since. So that's good. So that's our family. We've managed 2 chronic health conditions, and using foods, using very different diets, but also with some similarities. The common factors being that they were low carb. We've absolutely made it a focus that it's real foods, and we've embraced good fats, and we're very, very pro-fats. There's a picture of a fat that we've been making. We embraced tallow and saturated fats. So early on, when that was with Rudy's diet. So and now we've become, as probably lots of you in this room are, really, really focused on food, really aware of the wrong information that's coming at families like us. So we're determined to help other families as much as we can. So we've set up our own little grassroots organisation in the last few months, and this we want to be a resource for other families, to give them a little bit of hope and positivity, because one thing I did notice when I was researching is it all felt extremely negative, and everything we heard about diet was negative, and we didn't hear much of the good stuff and what can be achieved. So we feel like we were lacking a resource, and we'd like to bring that, make it available. So we've been interviewing other people, because it's not just about us and what we've been up to. We've been interviewing other people about their own real food journeys and how that's impacted on their children, their family life, and improved their own health and their children's health. So these people have been kind enough to meet with us and get their stories out there to help others. And we've got Russell talking about cervical cancer and diet, and Gemma talking about rehabilitating her son with a foundation of foods after a brain tumour left him without speech. And then Hashimoto's with Lisa, and Dr. Sarah Ballantyne sharing her story of how she's managed to manage her weight and her autoimmune problems. So that's the type of thing we're up to, and I've been asked to give a few talks, and kindly Matthew's friends have asked me to share my story with them at the Keto College last year. They have an amazing ketogenic diet charity, really, really pushing for ketogenic diet to be made much more widely available, and they're involved with training staff, training dietitians, and making things really happen. So yes, and we also did an interview locally, and our story was in the local newspaper, and then it got picked up by all the good publications, and they went with the story that she'd almost been cured of epilepsy. I'm not a fan of the word cured at all. And they also went with a massive skew that it seemed to be an avocado diet more than a ketogenic diet. But I guess the point has got across somewhere to someone, hopefully, that there is another option. It isn't just the medication that you're being shown. That was our hope. And we're putting together a sugar free course. It's free. This is a not-for-profit. It's all because we want to help spread the word and do what we can in whatever way we can. So it's due to be released in June, and it's just this is what we're asked mostly, and not how to do keto, because if I'm asked that, I would refer to Matthew's friends, and but we're asked how families can get started on reducing their sugars in their diet, and they know they need to make a change, but they just don't know how, and they don't know what, and they're busy and they haven't got time to look into it. So this is really our family favourite recipes and how to get started on reducing sugar. And we've also been asked recently to work in a local school, a special education needs school, working with pupils. It's a small independent school. They have several schools, and the pupils have autism, and some of them have, or a lot of them have, highly uber processed foods on a daily basis, KFC, takeaways, really repetitive, and then lots of them have food issues where they won't eat in front of people, and they've got processing issues with food. So we're trying to kind of support them. 2 of the pupils agreed to work with us for a whole week, and they took up our food challenge and ate real foods. They put away their sugary tea, their cartons of orange juice, and their takeaways, and their double pack of custard cream that they would have as a snack throughout the day. And they ate actual just food, really. And this is the kind of food we were serving, burgers, lamb burgers, and we packed them off with dinner and snacks as well. I've got a movie that we can play. Hello, we're here at the Woodside Lodge Outdoor Learning Facility in Leicestershire. It is a special education needs school, and they have asked us to come along to work with their pupils this week. We are going to be cooking all of their meals and their snacks, and they've agreed not to eat their typical foods, which is typically things like biscuits and cereals and white bread. And we're going to see if that makes a difference to the pupils, to their ASD type symptoms. And we'll be monitoring them and monitoring them, and they're really, really lovely. We've met them, they're really excited to get started. So we're looking forward to working with them.
So we visited some of our local organic farm shops to pick up some veggies and meat, and we cooked everything from scratch for the kids for 5 days. For breakfast we did things like bacon and eggs and sausages and waffles. For lunch we did salmon with vegetables and burgers and salads. And for dinner we did things like cottage pie and bolognese. So menu-wise we didn't go mad, but the quality of all the ingredients was second to none. And we did manage to throw in something every day that they'd never had before, just to keep it interesting.
People with autism, they find it really difficult to adapt to change, but they've been absolutely fantastic. I think it's more important because they actually enjoy the food that they're eating.
Some of them, sandwich, packet of crisps, a drink, and then a chocolate bar or something.
Right. It'll be a sweet drink.
And it will be a sweet drink.
Yeah.
It will be a chocolate, Mars bar or something.
Yeah.
Some of them bring in like Pringles and go through the whole tin.
Yeah.
Some of them bring a packet of biscuits and stuff and go through the whole packet.
But we've noticed a lot of difference with some James was doing back in the other day. In the morning, 9 o'clock in the morning, 9:30 in the morning. Normally James is quite tired at that sort of time, and he was doing something. It was dancing. It was dancing while he was doing it. It was amazing. So I was watching from the outside of the door.
Right.
I think it's been a success, so we'd have to try again.
Can I just say a
Yes.
thank you as well? Because sorry, I know it's not an award ceremony or anything, but it has felt really lonely being a foodie, being into real foods, and here it feels like I'm surrounded by people who get it and get the importance of it. And not only that, but you're all making such a difference and you're all trying to do your bit. So that's really special because it means that families like mine will be looked after and get the right information that they need. And a huge thank you to Sam for all of this.